we thought we would start off with asking you both, why exactly are you running for office this year?
Well, thank you. And yes, we are your current state representatives, and we are also running for re-election. I'm a product of Springfield. I grew up in Springfield. I care about our community. And we have a lot of challenges here in town. We have a lot of needs. We have a lot of challenges. We're doing really well, but there's always times that you need to reach out to your local representatives for help. I've always worked with our town officials to help them up in Montpelier as well as for constituents. I will continue to do that. I have experience, particularly in my world of experience with knowing a lot of folks up in Montpelier. I can cut through a lot of the red tape, which is really important for constituents here in Springfield. So I was brought up to give back to your community, give back to your state. I feel that strongly, and I have done that. I'll continue to do that. I will also continue to work across the aisle. I think in this political environment that we're in right now, I think it's really, really important to have people in Montpelier that can work across the aisle, work with all parties, and find compromise for the good. And I have done that, and I will continue to do that. And that's why I'm running for re-election. So thank you, Britt.
You bet.
Sure, thanks, Britt, and thanks for hosting this. My reason for running is kind of short. I believe in giving back to the communities. Alice mentioned that, and I also believe in stepping up for your communities, and whatever it is. It can be a committee, it can be a board, it can be a volunteer agency. I'm a process type of guy. I spent 44 years at Lovejoy Tool before I retired. 29 of that as a manager of engineering and process. I develop processes for manufacturing in the shop to record those operations. So I'm a process type of guy. I'm also on the select board in Springfield. I've been chair for a number of years, and I just find the two go hand in hand with trying to find opportunities for Springfield, whether it's funding or legislative changes or ideas, and just getting that boots on the ground, feet to the fire, to understand how the legislature can help Springfield. And I think the two, select board and legislation, work well together.
Thank you, Keith.
Sure.
So, Judy, would you like to introduce yourself?
I'm Judy Stern. I'm a veteran. I've been in Vermont 54 years now. Same house, 53 years. Well, I guess 51. I go on my daughter's age. I was involved in her school when she was in North School. And by the time she was in the other, over to Park Street, I was working in Fellows. I was a finish grinder. I had to buck a lot because men didn't think women belonged there. Boy, they were upset when I could outwork them. But I've always been outspoken ever since I learned to talk, from what I understand. And something I believe, I get in there and I fight for it. I recently had to fight for something that my daughter deserved and people were dragging out, and I stepped forward, and she should have just paid me the $7,000 because the lawyer was worthless. But I got within 2 weeks of making a phone call, getting her what she deserved. And that's what I do, and I'll do it for everybody. I don't sit back and pay favoritism. And I'll just put everything out. Anybody that has known me over the years would know that. So hopefully you learn that also.
Judy and I had a small business, actually two, one in Springfield for a number of years, and our main business was up in White River, Stern's Quality Produce, that some of the people from here I know shop there too. And I ran for office a couple times without success, but I was running the business with Judy full time anyways. So, it was more to get my ideas heard. And I ran for governor against Phil Scott because I didn't think Phil Scott was really standing up for us with the right issues. So I challenged him in the primary. I did pretty good considering, being an unknown and still working quite a bit too. And I said, that's it, done with politics. And then the carbon tax came up.
Mm.
We saw the bill, the property tax bills, how much they went up in one shot. And then they're piling on us with the carbon tax. They call it the Affordable Heat Act, which doesn't make any sense, but that's how it works. We're looking at, according to the state of Vermont's own calculations, $4 a gallon a tax on heating oil and kerosene, and $2.12 a gallon for propane. And that's just unsustainable for way too many people. The biggest issue I have with it is they never looked to see how much it was going to cost. They just went ahead and passed it and said, we'll figure it out later. Completely irresponsible.
So let me ask you this, before we go to Judy. On the clean heat standard, that is up for vote in January,
Yes.
where people's heating fuel could go up to as much as $4 more per gallon. What are your intentions as a representative of Springfield when that vote comes to you in the legislature?
Oh, definitely vote no. Absolutely. Phil Scott vetoed it, and we have a super majority. They overrode his veto. So now, if we don't win enough seats, we'll probably see that.
And so there are probably some other issues we'll talk about today too. But what kind of impacts if heating fuel went up as much as $4 a gallon? What type of impacts would that have compounded with other increases in cost of living on elderly and working families?
It's just going to cripple them. I mean, where are they going to come up the money for that? I did a letter to the editor and posted on Facebook. A lot of people are going to get the 5-gallon cans, go over to New Hampshire and fill up every week. Get four 5-gallon cans and put it in there. Keep doing that to try to offset it. But is 20 gallons going to be enough to heat a house for a week?
It's a very real concern.
It's a huge concern.
I'd just like to see some of these things they've driven up, like the carbon axe, or the one where you're supposed to get so much carbon out, and if we don't get it out, then anybody gets to sue us for that. And with this, the heating act that they're doing now, there's houses that are centuries old that have not been heated, insulated. People can't afford it, but that's going to drive them up. They'll probably have to go out, and where they're going to live, because apartments are not cheap, and by the time all these prices get added up, price of rent's going to go up, and they won't be able to afford it.
Sure, and with that in mind, affordability, the clean heat standard is set up to find alternatives to fossil fuel heating, whether it's propane or fuel oil. So fossil fuel heating was very expensive a few years ago. It was approaching $5 a gallon. The year after that, I think I was contracted at $4.35 a gallon, and that was a local company. And that's unaffordable to a lot of constituents, whether you're low income, which there is some help for low income, but the moderate incomes are the ones that are paying the bulk of it, it seems like. So that type of expense was debilitating to a family paycheck, and you mentioned that with childcare. So this bill was designed to find alternatives for fossil fuels, and that includes heat pumps, pellet stoves. There's some biofuels that were included in the program, which would kind of earn credits with the fuel oil companies, and that credit would be in turn returned back to the constituents, whether you're low income or moderate income, for those fossil fuel alternatives, and that helps to lower the cost. Now, I have a personal example. I put heat pumps in. This will be our 4th winter with them. It's a mini split, one upstairs, one downstairs, and our fuel bill that year, for our fuel oil bill for when it was near $5 was close to $2,000 for the 500 gallons, and that's a lot of money. And by putting in, there's an investment into the heat pumps, the cold weather heat pumps, and we put those in, loved them. Our usage dropped that first year to 80 gallons. The next year, we compromised a little bit. We said we need to run the furnace a little more. The electricity bill went up some, and then next year we burned 125 gallons, but still less than a full tank. So that savings gets applied to the installation of the heat pumps. In our case, the heat pumps could be a pellet stove, and with the credits that'll be earned from the fuel oil dealers, could be returned back to the constituents to help them subsidize the cost of implementation. It's not the end-all answer, though. Truth be known, I voted no initially for that bill in my committee and then on the House floor because a lot of the costs weren't defined. The administration put out initially it was going to be 70 cents a gallon. The fuel oil dealers put together a program. They came out, it was going to be $4 a gallon. There was recently when the PUC rolled out the program, there was a number put out 17.5 billion, which was refined later down to 10 billion. Still an enormous amount of money. The end-all answer is we don't know what that cost is yet because the plan hasn't been finalized, and that will be returned to the legislature in January, and they'll make a decision whether they want to go forward with it, amend it, or cancel it. And my concern is the cost to the constituents.
Sure.
I think everyone just has to sit back and take a deep breath here, because I think there is a lot of misinformation that's coming out on this. What the legislature did was ask the Public Utilities Commission to go, they're the expertise in this. We're a part-time legislature, we're not the expertise. We said, okay, Public Utilities Commission, you go figure out how we could provide more incentives and more opportunities for Vermonters to start moving away from being totally dependent on fossil fuels. Now, some folks will say, well, you wanted to get us off of fossil fuels completely. That is erroneous. That is just not feasible. But we can decrease our consumption of fossil fuel by supporting alternatives to it. And that's what the Public Utilities Commission is coming back, like Kristi said, with a plan. And it will be up to the legislature to go through that proposal in committee, take testimony, work it through. I think also that people think, well, the solution is heat pumps. I have concerns about that because, as you just stated, Britt, your home isn't designed for that. My home isn't designed for it. Kristi's home may be designed for it, or it may not be. It's an individual decision, and you have to look at what you're spending right now for electricity. You have to look at what you're spending for fossil fuels for heating your home, and then you have to do a comparison. Will this help us? Will this decrease our costs? Do we have to upgrade our amperage coming into our home? Do we have to upgrade any of our electricity? It's an individual decision to make. Now, one thing I'm really concerned about in this whole conversation is everyone is talking about consuming more and more and more. And where is the discussion about conserving and not using so much? That's one piece that's really important to me. You conserve what you use. The other piece that I'm concerned about is for the use of electricity and the shifting of going over into more electrical use. What is that going to do with our grid? We have to start investing in upgrading our infrastructure to provide this. And the third piece that's really important to the whole affordability and the clean heat standard, however you want to phrase it, is right now we regulate our electrical rates. We regulate propane. There's no regulation of oil. So we're going to be looking at that as well. So everything's on the table, and I don't want us to get locked in one specific thing.
How about you,
Sure.
Kristi?
Yeah, some of the same thoughts that we've been hearing while out on the neighborhood campaign trail. And I too am one that I think I have a common sense for affordability. People are going to discredit that, or there's pros and cons or different opinions, but we're trying to fill the needs of our constituents, whether it's in Springfield or around the state as a legislative group, and trying to find common ground where we can support some of the entities and endeavors that we're trying to help. And we can't help all people all the time in every circumstance, but there is an enormous amount of need, and trying to find that balance of funding availability from the state, whether it's federal government coming in and helping out the communities.
I think one piece that we really did that really helped with working families being able to afford to raise a family and to work, because we know employers are looking for employees for our labor force, was the child care bill that we passed. Now we keep hearing, well, it's a payroll tax that was increased, but when you start looking at that, what someone is paying on a weekly basis is 45 cents, maybe $1 at the most. It's not even a cup of coffee. And the help that they're getting in terms of being able to pay for their child care, they're getting over $200, $250 a week in help to pay for child care. That's what we can do for affordability. It helps the family, it helps workers, and it helps the employer. And that is one way of looking at it, that if you can provide support to working families, then you've really helped them be able to afford what is needed to raise their family.
Childcare is just staggering. It's unbelievable. I'm a stay-at-home dad because that's the way that's the main way that we can make our lives work. Because otherwise, my work would just go to pay for childcare.
With housing and affordability, do you have any other thoughts on the challenges that we're facing and how we can try to overcome them?
Well, one thing is the Act 250 makes it extremely hard to build anything in the state. It's important to have it, to control it, but it's got to be at a reasonable amount of regulation. And when it first started, it was, but it's just kind of grown out of control, like pretty near everything else in this state.
Now, another point about affordability, of course, is everyone agrees that education funding has got to get addressed, right? Now, can you share some insights on how we might accomplish that?
That's going to be a big issue this session.
So we stood up a summer task force to look at the way that we're funding education through the property taxpayer. And we recognized over the past, it's been growing and it's accumulating since COVID, when we had the infrastructure funds from the COVID funding from the federal government, that we put a lot of money towards education and to help offset those increases for each year. Last year it kind of caught up with us where there was advertised to be a 20% increase in property tax for the educational side. And that the legislature looked at that. We saw that. The governor saw that. We all saw that it was going to be too much. That was what was advertised. The legislature put some funding from reserves towards the educational fund and brought that down to 14% statewide average. The reason I could support the yield bill and the budget bill this year was that Springfield's taxes were going to go up approximately 6%. It ended up at 5.78. But that was after the third revote. So we ended up at 5.78, which is, we are way ahead of some of the other communities that are as high as 30% property tax increase for education. So that's why I could support it. We ended up with the educational tax in Springfield coupled with the town tax at a 4.4% increase, which, yeah, it's still a lot of money to some people,
That's pretty good.
but compared to what it was statewide, we did phenomenally, and I want to give credit to the school board for helping out with that.
We're in better shape here in Springfield than a lot of other communities. But that's not to say that the pressure on the education fund is going to go away. What is driving some of that pressure is there's increase in supplies that schools are using. We're feeling inflation costs in our own personal life. It's the same thing in our school system. The increase in healthcare coverage, that's going up. just your day-to-day operations of a school building and what happens within that building is increasing. And it's happening across the state. So couple that with how you pay for it, those are systemic issues that really have to be dealt with. Now, one thing that folks have always said, well, why don't we pay for our school budget through our income? Do it through your income. Well, there's winners and losers there, because right now, with a property tax, your property values are pretty stable. For the most part, you're going to have your ups and you're going to have your downs, but for the most part, your property values are stable. So that's a stable source of funding. Income varies, and when you're doing income, you're really shifting it to folks who are living here full time, and you're losing income from folks who have second homes here or folks who own businesses, because they may. How do you do an income maybe on some of the folks who are running commercial operations here? So those are the things that will need to be looked at. Somehow keep your property tax and property values as part of the formula, but really incorporate more of an income base for that and see where your winners and losers are.
And
For the money we're putting into the school, like Keith says, we're not getting the education. And there's lack of discipline in the school. And when my daughter was in kindergarten, I used to go up, and her kindergarten is afternoon, I used to go up there and help them. I don't know, probably 3 days a week I'd go up. She had 26 children in the class, which was a good size one. But the kids were all moving right along and doing good. And some of them I see now had great-grandchildren in the system here. They're not in here anymore.
Yes.
And I think the education was much better at that time. I mean, I've seen there was a grade school right across the street from our business. And people complain about teachers. Well, I'll tell you something, those teachers there, I would see them in there at 6 and 7 o'clock in the morning. Well, they got there before me, but I'm saying they were there that early working. And some of them didn't leave until after 7 o'clock in the evening. So they were putting the effort into their students.
And some of them had breakfast programs for the kids on their own.
On their
with
own,
their
yes.
own money. Because kids were going to school hungry.
What do you think? What do you say to residents of Springfield who voted for candidates that overrode the governor's veto when the governor was voted in by much higher margins than the vast majority of legislators?
They need to pay attention, throw these people out. You can't have lifelong, like in DC, they're there forever. Some of them die in office. But we've got to get people in there to support. I don't know how many bills I see each year, but quite a few years back, Alice had said they had 1,803 bills in front of them. And how do you take the time to actually get in depth? Somebody writes these for you. How do you get in depth? And how many of these bills are already saying something else? So they're wasting our time and money going over all this stuff. And we need somebody in there to think. But she avoids me. And Kristi does pretty much too, because I say what I think.
that's what this task force is supposed to bring back to the legislature in January for us. My fear is it may not be enacted soon enough to have an impact next year, but we've got to look at how we're funding education differently. It can't be always done the way we've always done it, because we're always going to get what we got. And basically that's the definition of insanity or something like that I remember.
Right.
We've got to do something different.
Sure.
We all
There's just no
recognize
magic potion for
No.
this.
And-
You maximize the use of a dollar. You don't say, the dollar's given to me, so, do whatever with it. And that's what actually is what happening with the legislature. Taxpayer money, big deal. There's plenty more where that came from.
How do you balance what the public wants and needs with how we're going to pay for it? Because you can't keep going back to the same people. You can't keep going back to the same tax base and do it. And that's what we keep hearing, that people are saying, we need to look at trying to make things more affordable.
Ballots are in the mail. Every registered voter is receiving a ballot. It's your chance to participate in the process. And all voters get a chance to do that. And if you haven't voted in a while, please consider registering to vote, because every single vote counts. So thank you, and I hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you.
Thank you.